everything has become politicized, and I feel like honestly, both sides play into this. Both sides play into this culture
Oh yeah.
war that I don't think most people care. Like there's MAGA and then there's blue MAGA, and they both get like really hyper focused on trans people or on all these different woke things, which I mean, personally,
So Pan Zeitgeist. That's your pseudonym, right?
yeah, yeah.
And you're new to the
Um,
content creation game.
yeah, this is my fourth podcast I've been on, so
So
I'm
and
fairly new.
did you start your own podcast?
Not yet. I'm using Podmatch, so I might end up starting my own to get some people on. But I need a place that's kind of better set up to do that. I'm kind of just doing this in my room. Like you can see my bed behind me and stuff, so
Yeah.
I'm just getting started.
So my earlier episodes, this is my garage. So it's
Hmm.
uh it's kind of been converted since we started, but when we first started, we built up like a false wall, and
Hmm.
it was I mean, it was nice. It was on wheels and everything. Like, so if you could imagine like a shittier version of a movie set, that's
Yeah.
essentially what it was. And so we were in this tight, cramped up space. And
Hmm.
because this is the only camera I got, and it's a webcam, so
Hmm.
we had to kind of set it up on a tripod and uh, shove ourselves in like a little corner of the room and everything so we could get everything I guess a good shot without it looking terrible. And
Yeah.
the lighting was terrible and everything, but we just redid this a few months ago, and I really like it.
Yeah, it looks really good.
We
It's kind of
actually
like Joe Rogan-esque.
Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
what I was going for, is not like a not really stealing
Yeah.
his set, because like it's different colors and everything, but I noticed
Hmm.
a lot of podcasters have red, in
Hmm.
their studio. So I was like, well, I'm not a huge fan of red, but I am a Chiefs fan. So
Yeah.
I've got red stuff on the walls. I've got blue stuff on the walls, and so I
Hmm.
wanted some natural colors so it wouldn't clash. And so that's where
Yeah.
we got the color scheme. But we just the wall behind me with the curtains up, that's a permanent
Hmm.
wall now. And so
Okay.
my garage is no longer a functional garage. So
Yeah.
it's not cold in here in the winter time. It's not hot in here in the summertime. So that's essentially what I wanted to close it off for us, so we'd be more comfortable. But I mean, it's I like it, and if it doesn't work out, if the podcasting thing doesn't work out, if I quit or whatever, we can use it as another bedroom. So
Yeah, I know my girlfriend, her parents turned their garage into like a second living room. So it has like a bunch of chairs and everything in there and like a computer and TV. So
yeah, that's all.
it's something some people do. Yeah.
That's always nice to have like a formal living room where you bring in your guest and you can sit down and talk where there's no TV. And
Yeah.
then so back in the day they used to have like dens, or what they called dens, and
Hmm.
that's where they kept the TV, and or living room is what they called it, I guess.
Hmm.
But it those were back in the days.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want in my house is I don't want a TV in the living room. Like, and one thing I also hate is open concept. I think rooms need to be separated and like because there's different atmospheres in different rooms. Like the kitchen and the dining room are a totally different atmosphere from like a general like living room where you talk to people and things. And so I just kind of hate that about modern
I
architecture, I guess is what you
I
call it.
yeah, I actually agree with you. So we have an open floor plan house.
Yeah.
Like our living room and a kitchen is one, and it's an eat-in
Hmm.
kitchen. So it's a giant space, but
Yeah.
it for me, like my wife, it irritates her not having a separating wall there. And then of course,
Hmm.
when we've got the game on or whatever, I've got it real loud, and
Yeah.
everything's going on in the kitchen. You can't hardly hear yourself think. But yeah, so I agree with you. I
Yeah.
actually, so we have like a movie theater set up in our living room. So we've got speakers in every corner and everything. So
Mhm.
like I really like having a separate living room area than the
Yeah.
main living area, but that's not in the cards here. So
Yeah. I know when I was like my parents' house, which we moved around like four times, I think, but two of the houses were like open concept and it was just like everything going on. And when people came over, you had the whole family in this big area and it was just like chaotic, to be
yeah.
honest. But
So you're a political science major in
Mhm.
college. What is exactly political science? Because I know what politics is, but what is political
Yeah.
science?
So political science really didn't start until the mid 1900s. It's basically trying to study politics in a scientific manner. So instead of like before that, it was political science-esque, I guess, if you were interested in politics, but mostly it was just like people coming up with theory and like applying that theory. But political science really started with like, I think the advent of polling. That was really the first start of it, where they wanted to try to determine, you know, how elections might go, how the people are feeling. And I think political scientists just want to be seen as real scientists, like they're actually like studying something, which it is. I mean, there's something interesting about it, but really, I guess now political science is really just studying the world, uh, looking at international relations, coming up with theory like realist theory of international relations, which is kind of coming back. It was kind of dormant for a while, and there's like liberal theory of international relations. So it's just studying the world and governments, really.
So, so is there any history aspect of political sciences where you goes deep back into history and before even the United States even started?
So, I mean, not so to my knowledge, mostly history would be involved in like historical studies. But I think there is some overlap in the sense that you might use historical things to like influence what you're talking about now. So you might say, you know, if some political theorists might say that, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is like, like what Vladimir Putin said to Tucker Carlson due to historical ties between those countries. But I don't know if a political science scientist would go back to like the Kievan Rus the way that Putin did. I think they would probably go back and say, these countries have been historically linked for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And but they would talk about more recently with the Soviet Union. They wouldn't really go back too far, but
Right.
there is some overlap. And a lot of people interested in political science, like myself, are also interested in history. So it does kind of impact them, but I don't think they would play too much into like old history. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So when we're talking about like modern history, is like I think you can even go back all the way to the First World War, before the First World War, when you're talking modern history, because the First
Mhm.
and Second World War really kind of changed the world. So it's
Yeah,
the geopolitical landscape after World War One is what led to World War Two, and then
yeah.
um, and that oddly enough may lead us to World War Three.
Well, hopefully, and I pray that the invention of nuclear weapons is a horrible thing for humanity in terms of the possibility of, absolute destruction. But hopefully that, you know, the idea of mutually assured destruction prevails. I don't think we're stupid enough to lob nukes at one another. I do think there's a possibility of like some third party that's not a state, some terrorist organization or something like that getting a bomb and detonating it in like a city, but that wouldn't be something that we would nuke back. That would be
Yeah,
just we would probably invade wherever their headquarters is.
it
Um,
depends. It kind of depends. I think our nuclear doctrine's really kind of changed over the years to, uh, when we invented the nukes, we didn't really need them. They
yeah.
it but it did change warfare like forever. But in my opinion, listening to some of the geopolitical strategists today, I don't think it depends on the size and of the attack if we would even stop it or not. Like, of course, we'll send interceptors or whatever, but
Yeah.
the likelihood of interceptors working is kind of low anyway. So the the general idea is that maybe we would let it hit and then deal with the
Mhm.
consequences afterwards because it's not worth full on nuclear war.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, for example, say if North Korea tried to send a nuke to like Hawaii or something. Um, I'd say we would try to stop it, but if it's just one nuke, and especially with China, like China would probably threaten us with like you can't nuke a country right next to our border, or else we're gonna nuke you, and that might de-escalate that situation. But I think really, if World War III happened, I, I don't think it would be fought with nuclear weapons. Like
Me
maybe a
either.
nuclear weapon might start it, but the world leaders aren't going to, sign their own death warrant. So there's going to be a ground war. There's going to be men and women hook up into the military, sent to some far off land to kill other people, and that would be the war. But I think it would turn out kind of like World War One in the sense that it would be like trench warfare. It would like what you're seeing in Ukraine, maybe small areas of movement, but really, I mean, the world's so technologically advanced that you can use drones to like see where people are, but they can also see where you are. And I think it would just kind of be a fight of attrition, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that way too. It's what got you started in political science? What made you want to switch gears to that?
Yeah, I don't know. So I was always interested in politics. So when I was young, I used to say I want to be the president. I don't think I want to be that anymore. That seems like too tough of a job. And too many people
You
would dislike you, you
Not
know.
to interrupt, but
No,
the people that don't want the job are actually probably the best for the job.
probably, but I'm also 22, so you have to be like 35. Like I'm not gonna start a run today. But yeah, I mean, what I've noticed is I've worked a little side tangent, I'll get back, but I've met some, and I'm not gonna say names, but I've met some politicians, like local politicians in the large cities of Kentucky, because I was the secretary of the Young Democrats at the University of Louisville, and I've met, some national politicians. And to speak of the local politician, they told me that basically they run their elect or their race, um their run for their local office based off polling. So they just run these polls and they said, okay, we run these polls and it doesn't really matter what I believe. Whatever it says on here, I'm just gonna say. And there's like no backbone to these people. And one thing I think that's really encouraged me as I've gotten older is I've seen how politicians are. And it's really, I mean, and I don't like Donald Trump, but the statement that it's a swamp is true. I mean, it's a big swamp and I think they need to be replaced. But I guess really I was interested in I went to a STEM school 2 years early uh to college, and I was living on campus and living in a dorm. And I was going there with the intention of being a chemical engineer, and I took engineering classes. I took some chemistry class. I don't like it. It's not fun to me. And I was just like, well, they make like $200,000 a year. Like that would be nice, but I don't like it. So I decided to take the road down political science because I think it's extremely interesting and it comes naturally to me. So
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting and it's kind of refreshing that young people are getting into political science, history,
mhm,
and all that stuff. Because really, I mean, like I'm 39, so like I'm
mhm,
the same age as our current vice president. And
mhm.
I I love those guys, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
the thing for me is when I was younger, when I was 21, 22, I didn't give a shit about politics.
Yeah.
and I didn't really know a whole lot about politics. Now,
Mhm.
I still don't know a whole lot about politics, but I follow politics because it's interesting to me how history and politics go kind of hand in hand. So
Yeah.
it's really kind of that for me, and I'm more of a history buff than I am a political buff. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, I mean, this era in history is really is really something. This is going to be this is like, I forget the quote, but basically the concept is, there are some decades where days happen and there's some or like years or like a short like weeks happen and there's some weeks when decades happen. And
yeah,
this is an era I think that'll be in history books, and I think it'll be interesting to tell your children, your grandchildren, even your great grandchildren, and they'll be asking you when they're reading their history books about this time. You'll be like, yeah, I lived through COVID, I lived through the two Trump administrations, I lived through Biden, all that stuff. And I think it's going to be extremely impactful to the future. So I think young people, and I think more people your age or even older really need to, be more involved in politics. And I know you are, but there's some people who like are Gen X who really don't pay much attention. And I feel
yeah,
like people need to be paying more attention.
yeah. COVID, man. Talking about COVID, COVID really slowed the world down to where we could pay attention to some things, and I
Mhm.
think that's a lot of people my age and a little bit older. Um, I think I think being caught up in the rat race is a lot of the issue to where they can't pay attention because a person only
Mhm.
has so much bandwidth, and when you start out your morning and you got kids, you got to get them off to school, you got a wife and you got to get her off to work, and
Mhm.
you go off to work yourself. That doesn't leave a whole lot of time to be interested in politics, which takes up a majority of the day is like watching
Yeah.
the news and keeping up with articles, checking out Twitter, and it's
Yeah.
it's a mess. It takes a lot of paid, a lot of bandwidth to pay attention to that stuff, and I think that's where a lot of people my age and older kind of get screwed on things is because they don't have time to pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that one, I think you're right, and then I'll add a second aspect. But one is that people people are struggling, right? Most people don't have the luxury to sit around and watch the news. Like they're, running around, like you said, they have kids, they have to, you know, spend time with their family, they have to go work. And by the time you get home, you're tired, you don't really want to deal with that. And you've already dealt with so much stuff at work that is intensive to your emotional state, really. A lot of people are just drained. And so, and that might also be intentional. I don't know if it's intentional, but it might be intentional the way it's set up. But and then on top of that, and nothing at sports because I like golf. I'm not really into the aggressive sports, but I have an admiration for sports because really politics is just a sport game at this point. It's just, red team or blue team, which
It
I
reminds
don't
me of the
like that.
Hunger Games.
Kind of, yeah. But also there's this um going back to ancient Rome, in the Roman Empire, they provided the people with bread and circuses. And that was one of the um like mottos or something that would be said is like bread and circuses. And so basically bread was free. They would give out bread to people, and they would have these giant, coliseums or like, gladiator fights and distract the people with sport. And so basically they would be too passive to actually change the government or demand their lives be better. And I think that's kind of what we see with a lot of sports today is it's just a big spectacle for the population to watch, and then they divide and conquer them based off teams, so then they're fighting amongst each other instead of fighting the rich guy at the top.
Hell yeah, I'm a big sports fan. Like I watch
Yeah.
baseball, watch football, huge football
Yeah.
fan. And
Yeah.
you're exactly right. Well, we're bitching and moaning about, referees throwing flags and the owners are making a shit ton of money. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
absolutely agree with that.
yeah,
Divide and conquer. That's interesting that you say that because it's kind of like that with everything these days. Like everything is a dividing issue.
yeah. Everything's become everything has become politicized, and I feel like honestly, both sides play into this. Both sides play into this culture
Oh yeah.
war that I don't think most people care. Like there's MAGA and then there's blue MAGA, and they both get like really hyper focused on trans people or on all these different woke things. Which I mean, personally, I would consider myself like if you take the definition of woke, if you look at it, like I guess I'm woke in the sense that I think people are equal. I think, gay rights are good. I think women's rights are good. I think, people should be paid the same, all this stuff. But the focus on that, it's like the world doesn't revolve around that. And I think that really we should get back to class. Class is the issue. Like most people, it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, bi, if you're a woman, most of you are peasants. I'm a peasant. You're basically a peasant. We're all peasants, and we need to understand that we are the poor and they are the top 1%. And I think the 1% fund also both sides. Like
Yeah.
there's not one thing I hate is the Democrats we're talking about good billionaires and bad billionaires. And we need the good billionaires on our side. It's like I don't want any billionaires on our side
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. I absolutely 100% agree with that. So you were talking about like you don't like Donald Trump
Yeah.
just a little while ago. So I love Donald Trump and
Hmm.
it really doesn't have I like him on a personal level. I
Hmm.
think he's hilarious. I think a lot of his rhetoric, I think he does that. I think he does it on purpose
Hmm.
for politics. He plays up a lot of the woke politics, and he knows that it's not as big of an issue as people like to make it out to be. But
Hmm.
he, it gives him a little win.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where he's talking to, maybe 20% of the population that's all, paying attention to this stuff. Um, he it allows him to get out that little win, and
Hmm.
so he can be like, I did this and I did that and I did this. And so I don't think and I really honestly don't think it matters to him all that much. He is a billionaire. So
Yeah.
I agree that in a world, I am a capitalist 100%. I love
Hmm.
capitalism, but like Elon Musk is worth like $400 billion. Like I I could never fathom that big of a number. I couldn't even imagine $1 billion, let alone 400 billion. What the hell is
Yeah.
going on? And he pays like zero tax.
Yeah. Like, well, and he's also South African and he's not an American citizen. But well, he might be an American citizen, but he's not like born in the United States.
Right,
And
right.
so um what I think there is something about Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is a unique American figure. He, has been in the media, in news, has had his show for decades. Um, I think Donald Trump, if anything, I have some admiration for the fact that he has destroyed the system from before. And I think that's giving people a new opening to new types of politics. Like you've seen with the rise of podcasting, with the rise of independent news and independent media, Donald Trump is kind of just this catalyst. I think he probably doesn't believe a lot of what he says. That part maybe scares me a little bit because, what influences does he have,
Yeah.
like Elon Musk? But then also, I mean, what politician does believe what they say for the most part? I mean, and I disagree with some of his policies, but I think that um, it's definitely like which I wouldn't consider myself a communist, but there's this communist philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, who endorsed Donald Trump in the 2016 election because he said it's going to break up the establishment and then a new left will come out of it. And I don't know if we've seen that yet, but I would consider myself, I guess, a social democrat or like a, about probably as left wing as like Bernie Sanders. But I think that really, if you've seen, I mean, if you saw Bernie's campaign in 2016 and 2020, he came out of nowhere in 2016. Like
Yeah, I caught
most
him on Joe
people,
Rogan, and I thought he was
yeah,
had some brilliant ideas.
yeah. I mean, really, Bernie Sanders, he calls himself a socialist.
Right.
Um, I don't know if he's really a socialist. I mean, if you go to Europe, Bernie Sanders is basically a social democrat, which is not a full socialist. They're just left wing. But I think he did that to open up the conversation about socialism in the United States to kind of reframe it because, if they're going to call you a socialist, like no matter what, like they called Obama a socialist, they call Biden a socialist, and Biden's from Delaware, the corporate capital of the United States. Like you might as well embrace the term and change it. But yeah, I mean, I think populism is on the rise, right populism and left populism, and that's really what I'm really interested in politics is the rise of populism. So we saw a populist era in the United States in the early 1900s, and that kind of introduced work labor laws, child labor laws, the 8-hour workday. All these things came about due to populists in the early 1900s, and I think we're living through a similar period right now. Hopefully, it doesn't take a Great Depression to take a lot of the changes or to have a lot of the
Right,
changes that we
right.
had last time. But you know, I think left populists and right populists have a lot more to agree on than they divide
Oh
us about.
yeah. So you and I probably have a lot more in common than we don't. And
Yeah,
I'm on the right side, you're on the left.
yeah,
So a lot of that has to do with like the way we grow up and some
hmm
of the things that we believe versus some of the things we don't believe. But the bottom line is like I'm more center than I am
hmm
right. And
yeah,
some like I said, Bernie Sanders had some genius ideas that
hmm
his thing with the taxing the like a fraction of a percent from each stock deal.
hmm
That's genius. That can fund a lot of stuff, and
yeah,
I'm surprised that Donald J. Trump hasn't stolen that, but
yeah,
it's there was a lot of brilliant ideas that Bernie Sanders had in that interview that I watched with Joe Rogan.
mhm.
But I think centrists, people that are more in the center, are showing up and showing out now because for so long we've been drowned out by the loudest in the aisle, which is the far right and the far left.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I don't like is our terms of the use left and right, uh, or the using the terms left and right anymore
Divide and
because
conquer, right?
again, that's kind of what it is, and also like this comes from the French, the French Revolution, where, and I'm blanking on the name of wherever they had this meeting, but like traditionally, the French would hold these estates or these like estates general or something, where basically these like there's like the peasants would come in. There was the nobility, and then there was the church, and they would like kind of discuss political changes. And there was one time when all the peasants sat on the left side of the room, and they all like united against the aristocracy and the church. And that's where our term, and this was like in like, and I may be mistaken, but it was hundreds of years, it was like 1700s or 1600s or something, and or it could have been the early 1800s, and it just doesn't really make sense anymore. Like that doesn't make sense, and I think we should be dividing it based off populist and not populist, or like for the people. And there could be better terms. I'm coming up with this on the fly, but
Right, right.
something for the people, and instead of using this left-right divide, because really cultural issues, I'm fine with a populist movement based off, say, if the Republican Party over these next 4 years, if it Donald Trump shows to like not actually make changes for the people, if he like gets in bed with these tech oligarchs and like perpetuates this late stage capitalist society, which I don't think is really even real capitalism. But um, if that happens and people who are like Trumpers or MAGA people who feel like left out of that, if you can bring them over and a lot of moderates over to the left, I think that needs to be done by, I'm fine. Like I personally might be pro-choice, but I'm fine with somebody in my coalition not being pro-choice. I'm fine with somebody in my coalition um, being more traditional about certain things. Because while I admire and I'm really grateful for the amount of change we've made over the past 20, 30 years, some people were raised differently. It takes time for changes to, be embedded in people's minds and for them to feel comfortable with that. I mean, there are a lot of older people who grew up during like literal segregation. Like
Yeah.
my great grandparents still use the word colored when referring to people, black people or different people. And I don't think they mean anything by it, but it's just their language and the way they talk. And so I think we need to be more understanding of that and open the left up to those types of people. Because really, if you talk to like a Republican at a Trump rally and you ask them, if you don't use the words Medicare for all and you don't use the words like universal health care, free health care, if you just explain what it is, if you explain the policy, they will agree with you. You see people go in there and talking to them, they're like, yeah, I agree with that. But because the words are so politicized, so we need to really focus on getting people over to our side and actually advocating for policies that help people. Because while Bernie Sanders might talk about Medicare for all and he might talk about a living wage and these things, the actual Democratic Party doesn't support these things. Like Biden could have passed a $15 minimum wage tied to inflation, and he didn't. And so, and then, so you have to change the party, but really, I think you need primaries in both of the parties for basically every single member of Congress.
Hell yes, I agree with that. That's that's brilliant, man. It's I think the two party system kind of screwed us a little bit, and I know that we have the capability of having two more than two parties here, but
Mhm.
again it's right and left, and
Yeah.
so right has always been Republican, left has always been Democrat, and I think they've swapped places a couple times because a lot of the
Yeah.
things that are important to Democrats are stuff that was important to Republicans years ago. But it's
Hmm.
I really like the idea of I like the idea of socialized medicine more than
Hmm.
the implementation of it. I don't of all the countries where it could possibly work, I think the United States would probably be the only one that it could possibly work, a full socialized medical system. And
Hmm.
that's simply because our government's the only government around that has the capability of funding it.
I mean, well, we have the capability of just printing money, which I mean, our
Well, I
our
mean, we
money is
are
a
the world's
fiat.
reserve
Well,
currency,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, we I think it's something we could do. I mean, I don't know if like pharmacies should be socialized. I don't know if like, I mean, definitely, I don't think, CVS and Walgreens and these major corporations should have the market share that they do.
And
But
I think we can
I,
both agree that nobody should ever have to file bankruptcy due to a medical bill.
yeah, I mean, people should be healthy. Like people, we shouldn't put a price on living. Like
Right.
housing, medicine, water, things that you need to survive, I think should be provided to you. Like, but I definitely agree with you that, I mean, I guess some other countries do have socialized medicine and it does work, but I know they also have issues with, like in the UK, uh, they're having debates about funding and about cutting certain
Right. I
aspects.
think the issue is pay.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it boils down to pay. I think if a doctor has to go through 10 years of training, they're not going to want to come out of college and earn $50,000 a year working for the
Yeah.
government. And that's essentially what happens is every
Yeah.
doctor is only being paid a government salary, which can only go so high because the government doesn't have very much money. However, with Bernie Sanders' idea of like that fraction of a percentage off of a stock
hmm
deal, a stock trade,
Yeah.
some of those are millions of dollars, at a time. And if you do that with every stock transaction, we could fully fund something like that and pay doctors $1 million a year.
Yeah, well, I mean, also if you look at the actual dollar value of how much healthcare, and this was back in I don't remember if it was 2016 or 2020, but if you look at healthcare costs over 10 years, it was like one point some, or it was like one to like a couple $1 billion cheaper, not for the government, obviously, but for the amount of money the American people pay into healthcare. It was cheaper to have healthcare paid for through the government and through your tax dollars. And that's why they call it free healthcare because it is provided by the government. It's not free. I mean, obviously, like you
Yeah.
have to pay taxes, but the amount of money going towards that in your taxes is less than you would pay over the year to an insurance company. And I mean, you don't even have to do full socialized medicine, which I would probably support that. But even if you wanted a compromise of just like having a government health insurance provider that basically will pay these doctors who work for private companies or private hospitals and private doctors' offices, if you pay them through that instead of through the private healthcare insurance, that would be something that I'd be open to supporting as well because that would also save money. And but that would involve some reform with Medicare and Medicaid. I think Medicare and Medicaid should probably be combined into one program. It doesn't make sense and it's kind of confusing. Like old people, if you're living in a nursing home, I believe you're using Medicaid, not Medicare. And it doesn't make sense. And I think we need a one system. We need one healthcare system. So there would be some reform necessary. But and I said this on a previous podcast, but I think the core issue of this is money in politics. Is that Citizens United in the early 2000s, said basically corporations are people and they can donate as much money as they want to these super PACs. And these
Yeah.
super PACs run ads and they're not supposed to be affiliated with the campaign, but they often are. And it just doesn't make sense that corporations and billionaires can spend as much money as they want influencing elections in the United States. And when the Democrats are really worried about, Russian interference or all this, we have our own oligarchs interfering in the election and they do nothing. And so, I mean,
And some of those are
there needs
some of those are foreign as well.
well, yeah, yeah, I mean you like those like Elon and I mean I can't think of any other foreign billionaires in the United States,
There's
but
a
that
lot
just
of them. Not maybe not
yeah.
billionaires, but there's a lot of foreign influence going to those
Mhm.
PACs and super PACs.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure China and Russia and everybody else is funneling money in here. I mean,
Oh
that's
yeah.
one of the things is like I wouldn't put it past the CIA to be destabilizing our elections, but also I'm sure everybody's got some skin in the game on destabilizing the United
Yeah,
States.
yeah. That's kind of interesting that you say that because it's like when you think of our systems as a whole, they don't make sense.
Yeah.
None of these governmental around the world, worldwide, none of them make any sense.
hmm
We're talking about socialized medicine here, but if it wasn't for governments, we wouldn't need socialized medicine. We wouldn't need that. We would all have money to spend. And you had said something interesting just a few minutes ago about housing, food, and medical. Stuff that
hmm
we all need should be provided to you. That's so. Do you would you support like a universal basic income?
So that's something that it depends on its implementation because I know that there are some libertarians who I've seen who support universal basic income and they support it because they want to basically cut all the other um like social security, they want to cut all these other services like unemployment. And I don't think it should be done like that. I think that there should be a baseline. I mean, I guess I don't know. I feel like I mean, thinking about it right now, I mean, I guess if it was high enough to survive, then maybe it could replace Social Security. But I don't know. I mean,
I don't
I
think
would
you'd want
support
it
it.
really high enough to survive. I think you'd want to have it high enough to where it alleviates the pressure
Mhm.
of having to pay rent, uh,
Yeah,
it- maybe maybe not even utilities because public utilities are a ripoff too. Um, it's the interesting thing about that is like we never really own anything anyway, and
yeah,
for me, it's that argument between socialist and capitalist. I am
yeah,
a capitalist. I love capitalism, but at the same time, I don't. Housing is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because the more capitalist it becomes, the more it's eventually housing will be only for rich people.
yeah. I mean, you're even seeing these, massive corporations buying up residential neighborhoods and renting them out.
Yeah,
And
we're actually seeing that right in this neighborhood
yeah, and
that I'm in.
it's it's really the death of the American dream. I mean, the American dream is on its last leg. I mean, there's basically no upward mobility.
Trajectory. Yeah.
Yeah, in the United States, like you work your whole life and you're either a renter or you're a debtor. You don't own your home. And it's sad, and I think that is this even capitalism that we're living in? Is this capitalist? Because capitalism is the competition in the free market. I mean, capitalism came about when there was like a guy on the corner with a deli, and a guy opened up another deli, and it's who can make the best like pastrami. And now it's these corporations that own.
That's what capitalism started out to be, and now it's
Yeah,
Walmart. Walmart's your deli
yeah,
now. Yeah, I
yeah,
I
and
sympathize with that. Like I really do, and that's where independent thinkers have a problem
mhm,
because we can't. Independent thinkers like me and you, I can't reach people who I have in common politically. I can't tell them like, hey, like like housing's getting to the point where it doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make
yeah,
sense to pay $2,000 a month for a piece of shit apartment. It really doesn't.
yeah,
And I could go along with it if it was like $300, $400 a month for a shitty apartment. But
yeah,
I could get past it. But now it's getting to the point where my kids can't afford housing, and
yeah,
I'd love them to live here with me, but
yeah,
unfortunately they don't want to. So it's
yeah,
they want to be out on their own. They want independence like Dad had
hmm,
when he was their age. But the
yeah,
simple fact of the matter is, like, I didn't have a car payment, and
yeah,
while gasoline was costly for me, it was actually more. It cost me more to fill it, like, per gallon to fill my tank when I was your age than it does right now. So it's like 265 a gallon where I'm at right now versus when I
yeah.
was your age it was like 350 a gallon.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, yeah, it's kind of wild. So it was 2007, 2008 when I
Okay.
was I was
Oh,
your
the
age.
financial
Yeah,
crisis. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So um I'm used to paying high prices at the gas pump,
Hmm.
but I was able to take $70 a week and I was able to feed a family of three.
Yeah.
And
That. Mhm.
my rent was $450 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
I could afford shit back then,
Yeah.
you know, and now my son, who is 21, he just turned 21.
Hmm.
His apartment, man, like, it's a pretty decent size apartment, but he pays $1,200 a month. And like my house payment isn't even that much, it's ridiculous. And that's where
Yeah.
I sympathize with the younger generation, is because it is
Hmm.
harder for the younger generation to have the same shit as I had.
Hmm.
And I'm struggling the way it is. I just now bought my house at 38 years old. I bought my first house. My
Hmm.
parents were able to do that, in their 20s, and my
Yeah.
grandparents were able to do that in their 20s, whereas, like, for people your age it's just unattainable. And that's
Yeah,
where I
it
struggle.
yeah, it feels like wholly unattainable unless you win the lottery or something. And I feel like I was paying whenever, so I moved home recently because uh roommates didn't really get along too much. I mean, I don't have too many negative feelings anymore, but I just thought it was better for like my sake to move back home for a little bit. So, but
I'm sure your parents are sleeping better at night.
well, so yeah, I mean, I was living in Louisville, which is the biggest city in Kentucky. It's not too bad. I mean, crime is everywhere, and it's really down overall over the past like 30 years than it was back in like the 90s or before that. But they worry about, crime or whatever. And I was also living right near the bad area, I guess you would say, of Louisville. But I was still paying like 1,200 something dollars a month. But that was, split for a 900 square foot something apartment. But I had two other roommates, so that 1,200 was split, but they were living in one room, so they got to split their half, and I had to pay my half. But aside from that, but it's incredibly expensive. And for a while, I was paying the whole rent, and you really can't do it without going into like debt, without you know. And
And on
I
top of
almost,
that, we've made it to where cell phones are no longer a luxury.
mhm,
You have to have your cell phone, you know.
yeah,
We've made it to where vehicles are no longer a luxury. You have to have a vehicle. You know,
yeah,
we've made so even coffee. You know, I drink the shit out of coffee,
yeah,
and we've made it to where if you go out for a coffee, it's like $8 to get, something
yeah,
that, like, I drink my coffee black, but a lot of people,
yeah,
have sugar or cream in it, and it costs like $8 for a cup of coffee.
yeah,
We've made things so expensive that your average consumer can't even afford it, let alone young people. And that's, man, I just, that's where I sympathize. And you were talking about roommates, man. I was talking to my niece one time about roommates because she was wanting to buy a house and she
mhm,
was wanting to have roommates. And
mhm,
I'm like, here's the deal. I said, you're going to end up losing your house and you're going to end up friendless. She's like,
yeah,
why? And I said, because you get somebody in there and they're going to, oh, I want to go to this concert, and they don't have the stress or worry about the house coming back on their credit, so they're
mhm,
going to skip out on the rent, and then you don't have a friend anymore, you don't have a roommate, and you got to
yeah,
pay all the bills. The roommate situation is really tough because there's really no house that's built for two families.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't like having to live with people that aren't like my like significant other or my children or my family. Because
Right.
those people you have to deal with, and like you love them, and it's not like a friendship type of love. It's a love where you have to kind of try to work things out because you want them in your life up until your death if possible.
Right.
And with
There's a stake
roommates,
there. There's a stake in those
yeah.
relationships.
Yeah, and but with friends and roommates, it's like I've had friendships where if you're around them too much, like you might like hanging around them, but it icks you. You get annoyed. You might, not even be your real self because you're just agitated with like something they're doing. And it's just not good. And I think distance between people, one thing
Not
I
only that,
I
and then you're
hate,
like, what the fuck is that smell?
yeah, like yeah, like they just leave stuff lying around and it's trashy and it's like okay. But um one thing I hate is like the um oh, I lost what I was gonna say. Uh,
I apologize for that. That
no,
happens to
no,
me all the
no,
time.
no, you're fine. Uh, I think it's the ADHD where it's like I have a train of thought and it's like it gets interrupted. It's like, well, it's all gone. I have no
I,
idea what I'm gonna say
I
anymore.
have that too. That's one of those things that
Yeah.
we have in common is like I've got really bad ADHD
Uh-huh.
and I interrupt like a son of a bitch, especially
No,
during
yeah.
these podcasts. And it's like if I don't say it, I'll forget it. And then if
Yeah.
I interrupt that person's train of thought, maybe they'll forget what they're saying. So we're both just
Yeah.
screwed.
Yeah.
We were talking about roommates and having to uh, uh, with family members, you kind of have to deal with their quirks and everything because you have a
Yeah.
stake in that relationship. With roommates, you don't have a stake in that relationship as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was gonna say, which is a little bit off topic, but was third places. If you know anything about third places, it's, people used to go to, and I don't drink very much because, I have a family history of like alcoholism, and I don't want to get, you know, that for me. But um, third places, like people used to go to bars. People used to talk to people. People used to go to, I don't know, libraries or like cafes or delis and just talk and meet people and do things. And that doesn't really exist anymore in our society. And it might also be something to do with the cost of living and kind of the rat race, like you said. But
It has
people
more to
should
do
be,
with it has more to do with these.
well, yeah, that as well. Yeah, I mean, people are
Everybody
glued to
lives
their
in their
phones.
phones. Everybody lives it like I talk about this all the damn time, and you'll notice it
Mhm.
now that I tell you about it because,
Uh,
your generation and the generation coming up after you, you guys
yeah,
have a shit ton of anxiety.
yeah,
You want to know why?
it's the
It's
phone.
it's the screens because you guys
Yeah.
talk to each other. You talk to your friends, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, but you talk to them through your phone. You talk to
Yeah.
them on video games. You talk to them it's sitting at your computer DMing. That's how you're
Yeah.
getting your interaction. Whereas
Yeah.
when you're out, if you ever notice you're with a group of young people, they will
Hmm.
all talk to each other. Like they'll sit in a circle, but they'll talk to each other using their devices.
So yeah, some of them would, yeah, just text back and forth. I prefer not to do that, but I do know people who will just sit around and basically text each other and like be staring at their phone the entire time they hang out. And
Yeah, so
one
when we
thing,
go out, I make my kids order their own food. I make them talk for themselves. If somebody
yeah,
asks them a question, I'm like, go ahead and answer them. I'm not answering for you.
yeah, that's yeah. My sister doesn't for the longest time didn't want to. She's shy, I guess. But she didn't want to order. I always was, I mean, order for myself, but I still have like a lot of anxiety. I think I just did because my dad um kind of taught me, he made me like, hold the doors open for people, say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, talk to, all that. So he was more traditional, I guess, in that sense, which I think has helped me out a lot. I think it's made me be able to like communicate with people better than some people my age. But yeah, I mean, uh, another aspect of that is social media. Like you all compared yourself to like the jock or the cheerleader in your school or whatever you see in like your traditional like 80s high school movies. But we kind of have that times a million in the sense that you're comparing yourself to the cheerleader or the jock at the best school in the country who has like a million followers and is
Yeah.
touching up everything they do, and you're just constantly comparing yourself. And comparison is just you shouldn't be doing it. Like you shouldn't be comparing yourself to others in the sense that like looks or person, like if you're a shitty person, you should probably compare yourself to good people and make changes. But I mean, for most people, these kids don't need to be comparing themselves. And also society is so sexualized in the sense where it's like you're you're pushing like women shaking ass to like
8 year
middle
olds.
schoolers.
Yes. Yes.
It's bad. And I think it's basically, and I'm not like, I'm spiritual. I'm a little bit religious, but I'm not too religious. I'm spiritual, but it's like Sodom and Gomorrah to a sense. Like it's a lot of negative things in society, to be
That is a
honest.
perfect way to put it. That is a
Yeah.
perfect Sodom and Gomorrah. So I'm not religious either. I'm more spiritual.
Yeah.
And actually, like my spiritual awakening, and I was just watching your channel not
Yeah.
yesterday, but the other day, whenever it was,
Yeah.
and you were talking about your spiritual journey and
Hmm.
your experience with religion and stuff like that. I kind of have a similar experience where I grew up in Baptist churches,
Hmm.
and not because I wanted to go, because my family made me go, and then it became the thing that you do on Sundays or on
Yeah.
Wednesdays. You just go to church. I wasn't paying attention, and now that I'm older, I have a more nuanced view of religion, and
Hmm.
I definitely am more spiritual than I was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've had a lot of experiences with drugs that kind of helped out with that. So
Yeah.
I've done some psychedelics that
Hmm.
have with spirituality and religion. It's kind of like for me, it's like the difference between believing and knowing. And after I've taken psychedelic drugs and
Hmm.
went on spiritual journeys that way, I know that this isn't it.
Yeah.
You know, this there's I don't know what, but there's something after this.
Yeah, see, I've never done psychedelics, but I've watched a lot of, like Joe Rogan talks about it, different of these like podcasters and like people, do ayahuasca or do like shrooms and these types of things. And I look at the data, which is that you have these slow like the slow drip DMT, which is where they can keep you on DMT for like hours at a time. And they separate these people and they ask them like what they're experiencing. And they experience the same like entities. They experience the same like like you know geometric shapes and like messages and like these things teach you spiritual lessons and they like point out things you're doing wrong in your life. Like you're doing this, you should change this. Look at how this affects the people around you. And I think, you know, what the war on drugs is really just taking away the autonomy of adults. And I mean, while I think there should be regulation, like children shouldn't be using, you know, ayahuasca, children shouldn't be using, LSD or marijuana or things like that. But I think an adult should be allowed to in a safe environment. And I think that these substances have been used throughout human history to enlighten the people. And like you look at these shamans throughout history, the medicine men and the medicine man, they gave people tea that would make you hallucinate. They gave you these things, and they also used that to communicate with the spirit world. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is. I know there's something after it. I mean, I I think that we probably our consciousness is most likely separate from our physical body, and we only temporarily inhabit this body. Do I think it's like heaven and hell, where after you die, you go to one place for eternity? I don't think so. I don't think that's it. Honestly, this might be hell. This could be hell in the sense that, not in the Christian sense of hell, but in the sense that this is like one of the worst places you could end up. This is where
Yeah.
you go through the pain, you go through the struggle, and you grow as a spiritual being. And I think that, you know, there is some truth to the different religions, but one thing I think is interesting is like Rainn Wilson, who's on The Office. He's a Baha'i, which comes out of Persia in the 1800s. I can't say the guy's name right, so I'm not gonna try it. But he was like, they're Shia Muslim, and he comes out of that, and he basically says that he's a spiritual teacher, and a lot of these religions, like from Jesus to Muhammad to the Buddha to I don't know what Hindus have, but these different spiritual teachers all come from the same spiritual, like basically give the same spiritual message. And I think that's a good unifying concept. And I think a lot of more people should be behind that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And so you could also take it back all the way like to science, right? And energy doesn't die, it just transforms. And
Mhm.
for me, I think that carries a lot of weight. And with your consciousness, and I'm just now learning a lot of things that I should have learned at probably high school, but the there's a thing like collective consciousness. I'm learning about collective consciousness and how um, the butterfly effect and things like that. It's all for me. It all comes down to maybe not religion, but spirituality for me is there's something after this. Like you said, I don't know
Yeah.
what, but there's something. And I think maybe we even maybe transform it and exist on, on a different plane of
Hmm.
existence, and I think about that all the time, and just trying to explain it, I have no words for it, because it's like
Yeah.
once you see some of the things and experience some of the things that I've seen and experienced, and then you listen to other people talk about it on podcasts, and you listen to
Hmm.
doctors talk about it, and then you listen to old ancient scriptures and stuff like that talking about how the trees are alive and shit.
Yeah.
When you dive deep into that stuff, it's hard to formulate an opinion and spew that and talk to people about that. This is my opinion. For me, it's more like the difference between believing and knowing, and it's just
Yeah.
that easy to explain, and like, or not that easy to explain, just that way. That's the one way that I can explain it that might make sense to other people. And I also have this thing where with ADHD, and maybe it's a little bit
Hmm.
of autism, I don't know how to relay some of the things that I speak, like, or the relay some of the things that I'm thinking in my head. I don't know how
Yeah.
to formulate that and put it into words.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with that sometimes. I know that, I guess, to kind of go back to this, the knowing, I think you have like a lot of people will say this, like, they've experienced things and people used to write this off, but I think really you can have a spiritual experience and you can have even a hallucinogenic experience without doing like drugs. You can do that through like
Absolutely.
meditation. Some people get through that
Absolutely.
through meditation, and it's it's extremely enlightening to experience that or to really change your perspective. Like a lot of people are like in this dogma of the church, which I believe in God, a God. Like I think there has to be some creator entity, and we might all be fragments of that source entity, right? Like we might just be God in and of ourselves, just at a smaller level. But um, I think that really the dogma of the church has existed probably for far too long, and I think we're seeing changes in that. I think, I mean, with the low church attendance, people not really, believing in the mythology that the church puts out. And then on top of that, I mean, it's a little side tangent, but the Catholic Church is basically just the extension of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire adopted the church, and then it fell, and then basically the emperors of Rome have been the Pope, and they have a lot of pagan iconography. They're very paganistic. And if you're going to be a Christian, I think honestly you should be Eastern Orthodox. Like those I think are the real, like out of the two major churches, the Eastern Orthodox are probably more in touch with Jesus's message. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of failures of Western culture. And I think Western culture and Western society has also made us too rational in a sense. Like we think about things too rationally. A lot of these cultures in like Asia or in Africa, they just know. They know when they say it, and then Westerners come in, they're like, "Oh, do you have like a data point to prove that?" And it's like, "Well, you don't need a data point if you lived their lives and experienced it." And they're like, "Oh, well, that's just I'm blanking on the word, but that's like what's the word for when you like um they give people sugar pill and they feel the effects. I can't
Uh,
think of it at this moment.
yeah,
Um,
that's an
but
ADHD thing too. I've got it right here on the tip of my tongue.
yeah,
Uh,
but like
Placebo.
yeah, so it's they're like, oh, it's the placebo effect. It's like, well, doesn't that say something that basically you're able to heal your body just by thinking it's going to do something? Maybe the power of the mind has something to do with that. Can we look into that? They're like, oh no, that's just spiritual nonsense. We're gonna look at, this rock, or we're gonna look at, what this neuron does in your brain that's going down there. And it's, I mean, I think science has become too rational, and rationality is,
Science is a religion now.
yeah, basically it's, and I mean that's the thing with a lot of things. Like you see, Graham Hancock. Basically, I mean, even archaeology is basically like there's this dogma of like when did humans like civilization start? and they're like, oh, 6, 8,000 years ago
I
or
love
something.
Graham Hancock's theories, man.
Yeah.
And one thing that he said one time, I don't remember. I think it was on Joe Rogan.
Hmm.
One thing he said one time is like, you know, like, have we had planes before? And then you
Hmm.
start thinking about that. How many times in history have we been in
Yeah.
this exact same spot right here?
Yeah.
Because 100,000 years ago, um, the only thing that's going to survive is stone from
Hmm.
back then. You're not going to have metal. You're not going to have anything like that we have today. Plastic won't even be around in 100,000 years.
Hmm.
So how many times have we been here? How many times have we had flying planes? Are those
Yeah.
UFOs up there? Is that us from the future, from the
Yeah.
past? Is it
Yeah.
that's a lot of I think about a lot of that weird shit too. A little alien behind me. I'm a UFO
Yeah.
nut, so
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's just implausible to me that modern humans have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and then suddenly, like 6,000 years ago, we like walked out of the forest and started building like the pyramids and stuff. Like, I think that there's probably different civilizations that have existed and just been washed away. Do I think they've had like planes? I don't know. Do I think they were using like had skyscrapers and things like that? Maybe not, but they could have developed in different ways. Like they could have had like we like to look for ourselves in the past, is what
right.
like Graham Hancock has said before. And that's kind of narcissistic in a way. Like, why did past humans have to be anything like us? Like, you see so many different cultures throughout the world that are wholly different from like Western culture or American culture. You don't think culture developed extremely differently? You don't think they had different values? Like, so I mean, I think that there's probably a lot to discover. With aliens and UFOs, I don't know. I mean, I'm inclined to believe in aliens because the universe is so massive and so large. Um, but I think some of the alien stuff could just be a spiritual thing. Like it could
Yeah.
be that like we're seeing because you look at the past, and Graham Hancock has said this as well, which is like shamans would describe being abducted by these like gods and these like whatever, and we're talking about we call them aliens, but they'd be talking about it when they're hallucinating, when they're on on those drugs, and maybe it's just like a different dimension or a different realm of reality that like our human eyes haven't evolved to see. I don't really know. And I mean, that's for people smarter than me or more knowledgeable in the subject to determine. But I think it's extremely interesting.
It could be like the holographic principle, like
Yeah,
different dimensions just living up here. We can't see
yeah,
them or interact with them, but every once in a while they'll come down here where
yeah,
we are. You know,
yeah,
uh, I think that might be. It's fun to think about for me. And I'm a
yeah.
very simple kind of guy, so
Hmm.
like if I can. If I can just fade out of my like regular life for a little bit
Yeah.
and go down some twists and turns and like rabbit holes of um especially in history like UFO stuff in the past
Hmm.
and like the science of it currently and
Yeah.
it's mind bending for me
Yeah.
and maybe even like a thought exercise like maybe exercising my brain a little bit to think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think thinking differently, whether it's preposterous or not, or whether it's not true or not, is good for people. I think if you challenge yourself to think differently, even if you're, you know, consider the earth is flat for a day and you deep dive into that and you don't believe it, but just challenging yourself to understand different perspectives, I think is really good for
Well, there
people.
was
And it,
that flat earther documentary. I watched that. I can't remember the name of it, but I watched that. It was a guy trying to prove that the flat earth or the earth was flat. I
yeah,
can't God, I can't remember the name of me for the life of me,
I,
but I yeah, but I watched that documentary and I go down like so this conversation right here, you and I speaking right now, this doesn't happen a whole lot like on the internet.
mhm,
Right and left don't get along.
Yeah. Well, they're not
'Cause-
supposed
right.
to.
Um, but when you take all that stuff, politics and extreme views out of the conversation or out of your mind,
Mhm.
and you sit across from someone, I know we're not in the same room, but we're
Yeah.
looking at each other.
Yeah.
You have to see that there's humanity right there, and in order for me to
Yeah.
talk shit to you, I have to basically dehumanize you, where
Yeah.
that's not going to happen in a face-to-face interaction. A lot of people don't do that, and
Yeah.
so it's just, I forgot where I was going with that. See, that happened.
No,
That
that's
ADHD
good.
thing.
No, yeah. I mean, I think humanizing people is good. I think that often, again, yeah, the left and the right dehumanize each other. And I know I'm blanking on his name, but he's this young guy, probably maybe 5 or so years older than me. And he's an independent reporter. And he goes out there and talks to people on the left and the right. And I think he considers himself like on the left, but he tries to humanize these people on the other side. And I think that's extremely important, especially in these times, because I mean, I don't think we're extremely close, but we could, I mean, its tensions are high. Like violence is high, like in terms of political violence, and at least the words people use that express like, oh, they want a civil war. I don't think that's good. I don't think we should have brother against brother killing each other in the United States. I don't
I
think,
don't think it'll
you know,
happen.
well, no, yeah, I
Myself,
mean, yeah,
the people that are saying civil war are generally the least war, the least people fit for war that there ever was. So,
yeah,
the people that are like, the other side that are like, oh, bring it on, bring civil war on. Those are the type of
yeah,
people that that give me hope that it won't happen. And then,
yeah,
like here in the United States, our military, our our police are
yeah,
so, I just don't think it'll.
militarized.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
that's the word. I don't think it'll happen. And if it does, I think that movie Civil War, have you seen that?
yeah,
I think it could look something like that, where like big cities are a mess, but places like where I'm about an hour north of Kansas City.
uh-huh,
Um, so places where I'm at are be, like largely unaffected by
yeah.
and I think that's what a civil war would look like, but I don't think it'll ever happen.
Yeah, I mean, when most people are thinking about a civil war in the United States now, they're not thinking about like states seceding and forming a new government. They're kind of thinking about just, you know, I guess two sides that kind of form the left and the right, and I guess around cities and like rural areas. I don't think that would happen. I think if there was ever a civil war, which again I don't think would happen, it would be like, and I don't know if it would exactly be like this, where like Texas and California, in that movie kind of unite, and then there's the Florida alliance. See, and again, this movie was made by a Brit, so I don't think he fully understands the American political stuff because a lot of Europeans, this is a little bit off topic,
I
but a
don't
lot of
think he
Europeans,
necessarily understands like the United States topography either.
well, yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is like, um, a lot of Europeans will be like, oh, you can't point a map at a map where like Milan is or like this random city in Hungary, and then you ask them where Chicago is, and they put it in like Florida, and they don't know where anything is over here because we're also the size of Europe.
Yeah,
Like,
and they think they
you
can
know,
go like, they're going to go to Disney World, from Disney World to Vegas in one day without
yeah,
flying. you
yeah,
know yeah,
they're
I've
yeah,
talked to a lot of Brits that I've had to explain that, like, the United States is huge, and
yeah,
like as far as geography, we have everything here. We have
yeah,
desert, we have mountains,
hmm,
we have coastal cities, we have northern plains, we have western plains, we have eastern plains,
yeah,
we have the Midwest.
yeah,
This place is massive, and a lot of
yeah,
Europeans don't understand that because a lot of Europeans have never left Europe.
yeah. Well, then Europeans are. and no offense to any Europeans watching this, but or who would ever see this,
Yeah, so
but
we have about a 10% audience in the UK. So
okay, well, to those in the UK, you're welcome to join the United States, and to the other Europeans who aren't the UK, it's basically just a big museum anymore. Like there's nothing in Europe. Like they don't really make anything. Like okay, they make high-end luxury cars and they make wine and cheese and I don't know what else Europeans make. Um, and I don't know. I love the United States, and that's why I mean a lot of people on the right who claim to be like they're like the arbiters of patriotism. They get to decide if you have to be a right winger to be a patriot. I don't think so. I think I love America and I want America to be better. I want
oh yeah.
America to provide for its citizens. And I love I mean, I don't love how the American government is right now, but I mean, that's why we have elections. That's why we vote. And I love the American system. And go back to the Civil War thing. I don't think it's likely because we have a system of checks and balances. We have a strong constitution. And when people say Trump's gonna, run for a third term, they're gonna change the constitution. I don't think or two-thirds of Congress is going to vote for an amendment to allow that. And I don't think three-fourths of the states are going to vote for an amendment to allow that. And I'll tell you that he can fire as many military people as he wants, but they're not going to support Donald Trump just staying in office. If
I've
he
been
did
trying to
that,
explain
they would
that. I've
remove
been
him.
trying to explain that since
Yeah,
about 2022.
yeah,
All kinds of pushback, like why I'm voting for Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump,
hmm
and it's for all kinds of reasons. The reason why I voted for Donald Trump, a lot of it has to do with I understand a lot of his politics are not malicious in thought. He's
hmm
not. In my opinion, I don't think he's doing anything to intentionally hurt the country. I think, like with Doge and all that stuff, I think a lot of that stuff needs to happen. I think a lot of the government does need to be gutted. Do I agree
hmm
with how it's being done? Not necessarily, but at the same time, because of those checks and balances is the reason why, sometimes you got to take a chainsaw to it. Like, the Democrats are saying that Elon Musk has taken a chainsaw to the budgets.
yeah,
It, I don't necessarily agree with the 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 way they're doing things, but I agree that it needs to be done. And watching Donald Trump fight through his first term, he spent more time defending himself than he did trying to get anything done. And if people look back on his policies were pretty solid. And not only like his policies were so solid that Joe Biden, as a Democratic president, followed through with a lot of Donald Trump's policies and
hmm
also expanded on some of them. So I think I think with all the rhetoric and stuff, I think that the fear that I have is that the rhetoric is so bad that he'll never get anything done. On the flip side of that, I do think that sometimes you have to take a wrecking ball to shit to get shit done. I believe that the swamp, if it was going to be drained, like people have been talking about, like it's people have been saying drain the swamp for 30 years of my life,
hmm
and it's not been done. Nobody's been doing it. Nobody's done anything. People have been talking about how the EU and NATO need to be carrying their weight, and how
hmm
Europe's defense is atrophied a lot, which is why we're dealing with the issue of Russia and Ukraine at the moment, because
hmm
Europe has let their defenses atrophy.
hmm
And now all of a sudden that has become United States' issue, where
hmm
we've paid a lot of money over the last 2 years. And I think Donald Trump's issue is okay, that's fine. We can fund this, but there has to be an end point. You have to have goals and you have to meet those goals. And your
Yeah.
goals cannot be unrealistic goals. Like
Yeah.
if you're like Ukraine's issue right now, their goal is to expel Russia from Ukraine,
Hmm.
which the Donbass, the other,
Crimea
yeah, Crimea, and there's one other
in the south of
area.
like this. Yeah.
They want to expel Russia out of all of that,
Hmm.
which feasibly cannot be done without a major, major war. Ukrainians can't do it. They have to
Yeah.
have help. And the help that they have to have might start a world war. And for people over there in Europe, they're like, oh, bring it on. Let's do it and everything. I'm like, man, that has nothing to do with me. That
Yeah.
has,
Well,
we just want the bleeding to stop, you know?
yeah. I mean, Europeans want that because they haven't seen like they they don't envision themselves being in the battles. I mean, they've grown accustomed to our nukes and our troops on their continent. Um, I mean, I'm not a realist, but I think realism is influential to the war in Ukraine in the sense that Russia is a superpower, but really only a superpower because of their weapons.
It's kind of like that
And
word rhino, and they're a superpower in name only.
yeah, yeah, I mean, basically because they have nukes and they have natural resources. And they kind of represent the opposition to the West for the rest of the world. I mean, them and China. But I mean, it there needs to be a settled peace. I mean, it needs to be settled. Do I think we should be, I mean, disrespecting Ukraine? I don't know. I mean, we should still build an alliance with Europe, but also, Trump's administration is only going to be for 4 years, right? And maybe this is just something as a wake up call for Europe. Like Europe does need to get their act together, and it might lead to Europe federalizing, which I support a federal Europe. I support Europe, becoming not, I mean, obviously it wouldn't be called the United States of Europe, but basically these countries being states in a more federal system where they don't really tax independently. It,
Like kind of instead of the EU being economic only, it'd be for across all of it.
yeah, I mean, I think that would be good for Europe. They would be able, instead of having these small countries basically, trying to attract investors and attract companies, if you have the unified continent, basically, you can kind of pull your own weight in this world where it's not the 1800s anymore, and it's not the 1700s anymore. Like Europe thrived because Europe had a technological advantage because Europeans had been killing each other for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So we developed the best military technology, and then we got on boats and killed other people that we've been killing each other for so long. And now it doesn't really make sense. And Europe can unify. I mean, it's a lot harder than it sounds, but I think the political,
Well, they already have
reality,
the infrastructure for it. They really
yeah,
do because if you look at the majority of Europe as a whole, I mean they're all
hmm,
connected. You get on a train, you can end up you get on a train in one in one country at the end of the afternoon, you get off the train in Germany or what some shit. You know what I mean? They
yeah,
already have the infrastructure to make it work. Like Europe
yeah,
is kind of set up like the United States, except for the interstate system.
yeah. I mean, which I kind of don't like. I mean, our interstate system had some positives, but I think the our interstate system also is not the best. I don't like
It's
car-based
expensive.
infrastructure.
It's
I mean,
expensive.
it's expensive, but also like I would like to have trains like Europe. I mean, I like trains. I don't know if it's the little bit of autism I might have. I don't know what it is, but I like trains, and I think that we should have high-speed rail throughout the United States. And
I
it's
don't even
also
care
more
about high
beautiful.
speed, brother.
Well, I
I
mean,
love
that's
trains.
yeah,
I love
trains. I mean,
trains.
like people used to go cross country in a train, and think about how large and how beautiful the United States is. And you're going through the mountains to the West Coast. I would rather spend some of my trip on a train getting to
Yeah.
where I want to go, like one of those, the sleeper cars or whatever,
Yeah.
and you
My
get to
family
wake
and
up.
My family and
Yeah.
I have actually planned. We've planned out vacations. Like we want to go. Like we're an hour north of Kansas City. We want to go hang out in
Uh,
Chicago. We want to
Yeah.
take the Amtrak there and back.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be cool. And I think, you know, that's something we should invest more in. I mean, and a lot of our infrastructure, it's just ugly. Like it's like cities are ugly. Like most of these towns, they all look the same. You get off, there's a gas station, there's a McDonald's, there's a Dairy Queen, and it's just like these strip malls. And we destroyed the beauty of our country and our cities to a lot of to a large extent, which we could take some notes from the Europeans. I think really the government needs to, which this goes into housing as well. I mean, we need massive government projects to build housing. Even if you're not going to provide free housing, you should build large housing, units for people to rent, but it'd be cheaper house like rents. And if you look at Barcelona, I love Barcelona. Barcelona, their cities are made up of these like little subsections. And then the middle area is like a communal area, and it's like it builds um like a community. And I love community. And like with said the phone, we're so detached from
The
each
United
other.
States was actually built for war. That's why
Yeah,
it's so ugly.
yeah,
So our interstate, a lot of people don't know this. Our interstate highway system was actually built for the military.
yeah.
Those uh, one of the um, restrictions or qualifications, I guess, what you would say, that for a interstate highway is it has to be able to withstand the weight,
Tank.
the full weight of a tank, which
Yeah.
is 70 tons.
Hmm.
Um, Currently, that's our dry weight is 70 tons. I think that's without ammo. So, um, the grid system that we
Hmm.
have in all our major cities was built for war. It was,
Yeah.
and Europe itself is like Ukraine. You go to Ukraine. I've never been there. I hope to visit one day.
Hmm.
Everything there, the infrastructure was built for bombing. It was built for
Uh,
air raids coming over the top. So that's how a lot of the people in large cities were surviving in the early days of the war. They were going down into the tunnels, and a lot of their apartments, buildings were built to spec to withstand a lot of artillery hits. So a
yeah.
lot of Europe is built that way too, but we are built specifically for logistics and
Hmm.
ease of movement. The grid system, if any of our cities were to be destroyed, the grid system is all mapped. So
Hmm.
I I I, I agree with you. It is kind of ugly, but at the same time, it's efficient. It is very
Yeah.
efficient.
I mean, I think we need a new deal like happened in the 1930s under President FDR. I mean, he pushed through I stutter, but he pushed through the Rural Electrification Act, which electrified the United States, put the energy or the electric grid lit up rural America. And I also know back in the 1800s there were debates about whether the government should build telegraph lines. And like now you think, well, I guess at the time, yeah, they should build telegraph, but people were debating, oh, should the government do this? And they would like say, that's too much government. No, I mean, I think the government needs to tear down the electrical grid and replace it with, put it in the ground. I don't like the towers.
But they
And
need their own electrical grid. That's the
mhm,
thing that pisses me off about the public utilities is they're not public.
if they're private, yeah, yeah.
It, it,
Basically, yeah. Well,
I
yeah, I mean, basically the government allows monopolies in local areas for it.
Yeah, and like, okay, so we just recently had an issue here with our electrical provider. They've raised our rates quite a bit. Like our last month's electric bill was double the previous
Mm-hmm.
month's, and they we have this public utility commission for the state of Missouri.
Uh-huh.
And they approve rate hikes and stuff like that without even asking the public, without,
Yeah.
and they say, well, we need this rate increase to pay for upgrades. Well, they've been saying that for 30 years, and never once have they come up here and upgraded. I can still, like, the poles around here are 20 years old, and
Yeah.
the infrastructure is so old
Yeah.
because private utility companies are allowed to make promises and not
Yeah.
follow through.
Yeah. I mean, these companies should be nationalized. I mean, aside like aside from electricity, water. Like you shouldn't be paying for water. You shouldn't be paying for electricity. If it's so necessary in our society to have your phone and to have be connected to everything, the same way you know, like provide different types of things, like Social Security, like these things, when you're old, you need that. When you're this age, you need electricity. You can't really
Yeah,
live without air conditioning. I mean, you can, but and heating and all these
they do
things
in
that,
they do in
yeah,
Europe.
yeah, well,
I was
the
talking to a guy from Scotland a while back, and he's like, "Yeah, but I think we may have had one day last year that was above. I forget what he said in Celsius, but it was like 90 degrees Fahrenheit. He's
uh-huh,
like, we may have had one day above 90. The rest of it
yeah,
was like it was like 70, 75 degrees, and it's like that all year
yeah,
round. So,
yeah. I mean,
except for the winter, obviously.
well, yeah, well, that's one of well, they also use like natural gas and all that stuff for most of their heating in the winter. Europe's just a different place, and they're also built off of a lot older like infrastructure, in
Yeah.
the sense that like they're using pipes and stuff for natural gas that were built in like the 1800s or something, and we're kind of more updated than that. But I don't know, Europe's a nice place to visit. I would like to go. I haven't been. I was actually supposed to go, but then COVID happened, and so I didn't get to go. So it's
Yeah,
kind of sad.
I want to start my European journey. Uh, we talked a little bit about this off camera. I want to
Hmm.
start. I want to start in Poland. Is where I want to start.
Yeah,
I would like to go to Auschwitz. I would like to visit a lot of the World War II sites and just kind of start
yeah,
there and like for me because like the United States for me isn't a massive place. I drove to Disney World from Kansas City in one day. So it's
hmm,
it's uh I would like to travel all of Europe. Like but I
yeah,
would start in Poland. I would love to visit Russia one day. I'm not sure if that'll ever happen, but I would love to.
yeah. I mean, I'd like to go to Poland. I know the south of Poland is really beautiful. There's mountains, and like a lot of forests, and I'd like to go to Poland. But I don't know. I feel like part of me like yeah, like going to like Ireland or Scotland or something would be cool. But then also it's like those are like the basic places people go. I want to go somewhere in Europe that like most people don't go. Like I want to go to like the Czech Republic or like Slovakia or like Hung or like places people don't go and see
Yeah.
there. But the good thing about Europe is in most major cities they speak English, right? So you don't really have to worry about learning their language, which that's funny because a lot of
From what I
Americans
hear,
are like,
that's actually worldwide.
well,
Worldwide in
yeah,
most.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So my girlfriend, her family lives in Jordan, and she said it's the same thing there. Where like in Amman, the capital of Jordan, they all speak English. But if you go to like the rural villages, they don't really speak English. But most places in the world, if you go to a city, they'll speak English. But what's funny is like Americans will be like, if you come here, you have to learn our language. But we go abroad and we're like, screw your language. We're
It's
just
actually
gonna speak English.
I was just going to ask you how you felt about that. We just recently, up until recently, we didn't have a official language here in the United States, which I thought
Yeah,
was a pretty cool thing.
yeah,
And I don't necessarily agree with why we ended that, whole thing and made the
yeah.
official language English. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I I don't know if it matters too much, but if you're going to make an official language, I think you should implement like still have things in other languages. Like
Yeah,
you should
yeah,
still have, documents in like the way Canadians do it is they have, French and English, and they'll print, all bills have to be in French and in English. And I mean, America isn't just like an English speaking country, really. I mean, we
right.
took a lot of our land in the Southwest was taken from Mexico. I mean, you have Louisiana, and all of the Louisiana Purchase were French. Like, I mean, maybe we should have government documents in like English, French, and Spanish or something. Like,
Yeah, and
I mean,
that's actually one of the arguments I heard the other day from Charlie Kirk was saying,
ugh,
well, all our legal documents are in English, and I was like, actually, they're
yeah,
not. A lot of
yeah.
our legal documents are in Latin, which is a dead language,
Oh,
and that's one of those arguments that I've heard. But my 5 year old has. He's in public school and he
hmm,
has a young kid in class with him who speaks Spanish.
yeah,
Um, and he's learning English, but again, he's 5. English
yeah,
as a second language is really, really hard. Um,
yeah,
but he's learning little things like "El baño, por favor," which means
yeah,
the bathroom, please.
yeah,
He's learning things like that, and I'm like, man, I like that. That's cute, and that's
yeah,
awesome. That I'm not sure other than that, those little wins like we talked about earlier. I'm not sure what the purpose was behind that, but it's for
yeah.
me
I think
it's a
yeah.
little offensive because of our friends from the South are they speak Spanish, and
Yeah.
a lot of people north of the border speak Spanish as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went down there recently to Mission, Texas, which is right on the
Mhm.
border. There was a lot of people just openly speaking Spanish out in public. And
Yeah.
so a lot of signage around there was in both English and Spanish.
Hmm.
I understand the want to only see English because we only speak English. I
Yeah.
understand that, but unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, our country wasn't built on English speaking. A lot of people when 250 years ago, most people didn't speak English.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
and also like a lot of people are mixed heritage. Like they're
yeah,
German,
yeah,
they're Scandinavian, they're Polish, they're Italian. And part of what's great about America is, and even, I mean, this is going back even to the early 1900s, late 1800s. Like, there's these communities of, Poles or communities of Germans that speak German and they have accents. And this is also in our media. Like, it's part of being America is like there's new people who come in who don't speak the main language, which is English, because we're, originally was an English speaking colony. But they
and
get
now
integrated in.
our government documents now, the way it used to be, they had to be written in several different languages, especially Spanish. Now they're
Uh-huh.
only going to be in English, and people coming here for
Yeah.
help won't be able to understand how to read those.
Yeah, I know. I worked in pharmacy, and it's, you people come in, they need their medicine.
Yeah,
They don't know, you know, with like sometimes they don't know if it was sent to a CVS or a Walgreens or uh I guess I guess some places still have Rite Aid. And so you have to help them, and it's it's sad sometimes to, to think about that we're just leaving these people out to dry. And you can say, oh, maybe they shouldn't have let them in, and all this stuff, but they're here. Most of them are not criminals. The only criminal thing they did was cross the border illegally, or they overstayed a visa. And Ronald Reagan granted amnesty to millions of undocumented immigrants. You can say, okay, let's strengthen the border. Let's not let any more people in. Don't kick them out. Like grant them citizenship. And these people are paid under the table. And a lot of the times they're scared to go to the police when there's crime in the area because they're afraid they're going to be deported. So
yeah,
if you
yeah.
give these people legal citizenship, you allow them to be in a union, maybe get more money, for their family. If you, I mean, then just don't let as many new people in here. That's, I think, a reasonable approach. But I don't think we should just start deporting millions of
Very,
people.
very reasonable, actually.
Yeah.
And so my only issue with the border, so terrorism, that's my issue. Like we can't have
Mhm.
open borders. We just can't. And people who come through the border need to come the right way,
Mhm.
legally. Um, but I'm on the fence with the deportation thing. I do understand the want to deport, especially out of the large cities where the federal government is subsidizing housing for large
Mhm.
large communities of immigrants. But I am the Statue of Liberty, bring us your sick, your tired, your huddled masses.
Mhm.
And that's what built America in the first place. So
Yeah.
I'm on a fence about it, to be honest with you, because like I do see the need for some deportations. I also see there's millions of open jobs out there that we need help filling. Um,
Mhm.
and in general, a high population, we can handle a high population. There's only 330 million of us here.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it's about safety, I guess. And if we can, instead of deporting them, or round them up and check them out. If they're criminals, send them back. If they're not, let them integrate. I
Yeah.
guess that would be my solution. But again, like I'm not a politician, so it's a lot of
Yeah.
these things. The reason why, the reason why we have politicians is so we don't have to pay attention as much. But I mean, when
Yeah.
I feel like over the last several years, our representative democracy here has not been very representative. Um, I don't feel
I mean,
very
yeah.
represented, you know?
No, yeah. I mean, I would say that um we've had different eras of American history like this. So this is the basically I think this is like the second Gilded Age, which I don't know if I said any of that or anything you watched, but I think that so in the late 1800s there was the Gilded Age, which is when these um the robber barons, so like the owners of Standard Oil and all these monopolies and these big trusts, they kind of controlled the government in a sense, and they had too much power. They had company towns, which still exist this day. People think are like an old timey thing.
Yeah, I
There are
talk
still
about it a
company
lot.
towns.
I talk
Yeah,
about that a lot too.
and that this is basically the second Gilded Age, and it looks beautiful on the outside, I guess, to some extent. Like you have these big, shiny, glass skyscrapers that go to the clouds, and you have all these nice things, but really it's nice for the rich and poor don't really experience it. But that's when we had a progressive era, and that changed it. Like starting really, I mean, it started before um, the first Roosevelt, Teddy, but he was kind of the first person to start that trend. There's another guy, I'm blanking on his name. He was a Democrat. He didn't win, but he was a populist, like progressive in the late 1800s. Um, but to we've also had the kind of feelings we're having now about immigration before, except it being about, his people from Latin America. It was about the Italians or the Polish or the Irish coming over. And, they weren't considered white, they weren't considered American. They I think we're seeing the same thing now. To go back to the deportation thing, I just don't think that um I, I think there's a reasonable approach. Like, I don't think rounding them up is the answer. I think like if you come across somebody who's a criminal, report them. But um, we've had that kind of those feelings before, and I,
I think
I
it's
don't
more
necessarily.
protectionist.
Yeah, it's wanting to protect what we have, which I mean,
Well, not just that, not just that. So if y- so you're into history and political sciences, like if we don't straighten shit out geopolitically, we are in World War III.
Yeah.
Um, currently, um, there's all kinds of stuff like Russia is like Donald Trump just on Truth Social, Russia's pounding Ukraine, and so he's
Hmm.
thinking about further um, restrictions and stuff with Russia. In the Middle East, we had a we had a ceasefire with Israel and Gaza that
Hmm.
is in jeopardy now. If
Yeah.
we don't cool this stuff out, and then China the other day, they posted something that okay, you guys want war? We're ready. If we don't cool this shit down, we are in World War III. And I think
Yeah.
there's politicians, the president is one of them. There are politicians that saw the writing on the wall a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think some of the stuff with the border is protectionist. I think they want to close the borders and keep them closed because of geopolitical tensions. I think that plays a big part of it. But like you were saying,
Hmm.
maybe rounding them up is not a great way. Number one, it's expensive, right? We're supposed to be cutting
Hmm.
costs, right? So
Yeah.
number one, it's expensive. We have to pay all these ICE agents and otherwise these agents that wouldn't even have a job to go to big cities and round up illegal immigrants, which depending on how you look at it, may or may not even be working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, like you were saying, I think that maybe that wouldn't be necessarily the way to go. Like if you come
Well,
across a criminal, then deport them. I like
I
that.
mean, yeah, I mean, also, I think it's un-American in a sense because if you're rounding up people, like if you're wanting to win the next election, which I think it's reprehensible just to like go into neighborhoods where those people live and round them up, go to their workplaces and yank them out with men and guns. I think that's un-American. And I think if you're
Yeah.
wanting to win an election, you don't want that plastered over social media. You don't
Right.
want
Right.
um it'll look like Nazi Germany. Not to say that I think Trump is a Nazi or I think things like that, but I think that's the impression it gives when the average person who doesn't pay attention to politics sees. And
Well, it
also, these
reminds
people have
me
been
a lot
into,
of it reminds me a lot of World War II America. You know, with
well,
the
with the Japanese, but
yeah,
the Japanese didn't have the population size in the United States that that Latinos do.
yeah.
There's a
But have you seen
massive number
Guantanamo recently? Have you seen Guantanamo recently? That's
where they're
what.
trying to build it up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what actually I was talking to my wife a while back, and I was like, that shit right there reminds me of World War II internment camps.
Yeah, well, I think we should give Guantanamo Bay back to Cuba. I don't think we should be using that as like uh you know, we can escape the law by going to this foreign country where we rent this port and like torture people. I don't think that's a good thing to be doing. But, you know, I also don't know how much Trump, I mean, hopefully he can stop the war. That's the one thing. And to kind of go back earlier, you said something about him like taking it's like a wrecking ball. I think yes, a wrecking ball is needed, but also a construction company that comes in right after and builds up something that actually works. You can't just
Yeah,
destroy it and leave nothing, right? So
I
you have to
agree.
tear it down. But like I said with like Medicare and Medicaid, like okay, you're gonna just get rid of it. Replace it with government health care for everybody.
Right.
Replace it with something that works. Um,
Or or at least like you were saying, something that uh Medicaid and Medicare aren't two different things. Something
yeah,
like
like
that, yeah.
yeah, I mean at least like if you're gonna have like a government insurance, be like, okay, when you turn 65 or 60 years old, you go on Medicare and that'll cover everything. That covers you going to the hospital. It covers you an old person, um, or like an old person home or a retirement home. It covers whatever. And then for people who don't make above like, I don't know, $30,000 or $40,000 or something, those people can be on it as well, and it'll cover all their expenses. And if you want to have healthcare still for the people in the middle, I mean, I don't think that's good, but if the Republicans wanted to do that, okay, do that. But they're just kind of they just want to cut it and not do anything.
Yeah.
And he says we're going to cut funding by like 4 point something billion dollars, and four of that billion is already going into effect of extending the tax cuts. So what else are
Yeah.
you really cutting? Like you're
And
just
when you're
and
talking about billions, nobody gives a shit about billions. It's
well,
when your national debt's 34, 35
well,
trillion.
yeah, yeah.
It-
I mean, that's one thing about having the currency we have is that it doesn't really matter
yeah,
how
when
much
they're
our debt
fighting over
is.
the border wall. The border wall. This is how stupid some of this shit gets. The border wall. They were like, he wants $5 billion for the border war or border wall. And then okay, and then they're those same group of people are arguing to send $100 billion to foreign
You,
countries.
yeah. I
That's the
mean,
thing that bothers me about modern politics is we will say no, we can't have this to benefit the American people. You know,
yeah,
but it's such a small number, like relatively small when we're talking trillions. Um,
yeah,
a relatively small number, like $5 billion. The American people cannot have that, but
yeah.
we want to spend $60 million. You know, or Iraq,
Hmm.
$20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq. Now, I understand the need for USAID. I understand soft power. I understand CIA mind games. I understand all that shit. And I'm for it. But just stop lying to me. Stop lying to me.
Yeah.
That's my whole thing is I think that we can afford, since we're printing the money, we can afford both. We can afford to take care of the American people and we can afford our foreign commitments. That's
Yeah,
just
but
me. If they restructure things a little bit different, we can afford to do all of that. And I don't understand the Doge, and I do understand the need for Doge. I do not understand the need for the wrecking ball with Doge.
yeah,
You were talking about tearing down these programs and not having anything to replace it. I disagree
yeah,
100% with tearing down of any of those programs without having a backup to build it back up better,
yeah.
because at that point you're not saving anything. You're just killing it for the sake of killing it without
Well,
thinking about what you're killing.
yeah, and the Trump administration is giving, tax cuts to billionaires and these massive corporations, the same
And the
massive
idea behind that is
corporations,
trickle down economics.
which
That's the idea
we've
with that.
tried since the 1980s and hasn't really worked. So,
No,
I
you're right.
mean,
You're right.
like, so, and these same people who basically bought their way into the White House, I don't know. I feel like Donald Trump might have some, like, owe some people some favors. He might like he was in some trouble in terms of the cases against him, and he wanted to get back into office. I feel like allowing the richest man in the world to cut people's jobs at the federal government is probably not a good look, and especially when you're not replacing anything, like you said, like
Yeah,
if it's just the richest man in the world.
regardless of what your actual intentions are,
Yeah,
regardless of that, it's not a great look. You're right.
no, yeah, but I saw some person saying like, oh, maybe he's allowing Elon to do it so that it's not him, so he can be like, oh, Elon's doing it. But I just I don't know. I feel like that doesn't go with Donald Trump because Donald Trump wants to be the center of attention. He
Yeah.
wants everyone to look at him and like him. So I don't really know what's going on. I hope that they have a falling out soon and he gets out of the White House and stuff. Elon, um, I'd rather Vivek or someone be doing Doge, and I think also Doge is a dumb name. I think is a dumb name. I feel like you
I
should
do
have
too.
I think you could have given it like an official name. I think you're just making the US government look
I think
like,
Elon Musk is invested heavily with Dogecoin.
yeah,
Is my personal opinion. it,
Yeah.
cryptocurrency is a fucking pain. It's a Ponzi scheme. He's talking about
Yeah.
Social Security being a Ponzi scheme, which I do agree. Social Security is kind of a Ponzi scheme, but because of that Ponzi scheme is why it works. But
Yeah.
um, I th- Donald Trump and Elon Musk pushing cryptocurrency, that that is insane to me. I don't understand
Yeah.
why they would do that because most cryptocurrency is pump and dump, including
Yeah.
Bitcoin, and
Yeah.
um, it robs the little guys of their money to give to the biggest bag holders. You know, it,
Yeah.
it's
That's
it
like
is in
Trump
its
coin.
definition a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, it's I don't like crypto, and I've spoken to libertarians who like crypto. I don't really know too much about it. I know that back in 20, was it 2020, whenever Dogecoin first got big, or was it 2019? I bought some. I bought like a couple, like maybe like $10 worth.
Yeah, I made some
And
money on it. I made a little
yeah,
bit of.
but I I I don't know too much about it. I don't think it should. Some people want it to replace like our reserve currency. I think that's so stupid.
So they
Like
want.
we
I think the biggest argument is for decentralized currency. We already have that.
Yeah,
We have gold
but I mean, yeah, I mean, I mean, basically, you're just replacing a fiat currency
with a fiat currency.
with a fiat currency,
Yes.
and the American dollar. If you're going to create a crypto, have the U.S. government create crypto dollar or so. I don't know, but like,
Yeah, I think actually we do have the United States shit. Is it the United States Treasury or the federal some one of them has a US dollar crypto coin
yeah,
that is tied to the United States dollar. But
well,
you're exactly right. You're replacing a fiat with a fiat.
yeah, and I mean, we should get rid of the Federal Reserve. Speaking of that, the federal like we need a national bank because the Federal Reserve, first off, doesn't have any reserves, and it's not federal. It has nothing to do with the government. Like the government picks the head of the Federal Reserve, but it's a private bank, and that's I mean, like there should be a national bank of the United States that controls it. But that's a
You
whole
know
different
what,
conversation.
Pan? I think you know what we could do. You and I could actually have a whole different conversation, like a whole different like an entire podcast on the Federal Reserve and the monetary system because it is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
I I'm one of those I really really love that the United States currency is the world's reserve currency. I like
Hmm.
that. I love it.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. But as far as they want to push these decentralized coins, is what they're
Hmm.
calling them. But the thing is, like we already have a decentralized form of payment. It's
Uh-huh.
gold and silver. I mean,
Yeah.
we're even using copper at sometimes
Hmm.
as payment. You know, we trade foreign governments payments for that. Sometimes they send copper here for United States dollars.
I didn't
It's
know
it,
that. That's cool. I
I'm
mean,
telling
copper's really is a really important metal. So
it actually is it
yeah.
and it's lot more important than people think it is. I actually I love shiny stuff. So as I'm a collector of like shiny metals and diamonds.
Yeah.
So it's for me, we already have all that stuff. We already have a decentralized currency. Just buy gold. You know, that's it's that
Yeah.
simple. Um, People want to protect their investments, a hedge against inflation. Well, if the bottom drops out and we don't have the dollar, what are we going to have any? You know, first of all, if we don't have the dollar, your cryptocurrency is worthless. It's
Yeah,
less
you're not
than
gonna have
worthless.
access to the like if the dollar somehow collapses, I think the United States will be in such extreme poverty. Who like you're gonna be having your phone and looking at your crypto wallet. No, if things go to crap, I mean, if you have some gold around, if you take I guess the copper pipes out of your house, you cut them down, you trade that for stuff. I mean, it would be a barter and trade system with precious metals or other items.
I've
but
said that
I
for
don't think,
years. I think
yeah,
people freak out over nothing.
yeah. But, I mean, I don't know if we should go back to the gold standard because I think the modern modern monetary theory, which kind of comes out of Keynesian economics, um, I think a fiat currency is pretty good. We kind of control how much it's worth.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think being inflationary, like gold isn't inflationary.
yeah,
So I think I think the fiat currency, I think what it has going for it is the inflationary value of it. Like we want to probably try to keep it around 2 to 3% a year,
mhm,
inflation. But during times of economic struggles and stuff, I do understand the needs to raise it and then counterbalance it on the other side when we're doing good. We need to lower it.
yeah. I mean, there's some truth to that. I know that also, like, and I'm not fully knowledgeable about economics, and like I know a little bit about
Me
economics,
either. I
but I'm
didn't even graduate high school, brother.
oh well that I mean that's fine, but I I think there's better ways to deal with it. At least I've heard, other than like raising inflation, like the interest rates and stuff. And like there's another thing where like they'll try to increase unemployment during certain times. And I think I've seen people talk about there's other ways to deal with the issue other than just making people not have jobs. Because basically the market runs on like, oh well, you want a higher wage, well we keep this certain percentage of unemployed people around so that, oh, you want more money, we're going to go hire this guy who doesn't have a job. Like,
Right.
so basically that's how it kind of works. But um there are some outdated things in the economic system, but again, I'm not fully knowledgeable about the
Well,
whole economic stuff.
I tell you what, man, we've been on here almost 2 hours.
I know.
So this has been a
It's
great conversation, a
yeah.
really, really great conversation
Hmm.
considering you're almost half my age,
Yeah.
and I'm 39, you're 22.
Yeah.
And you and I are into a lot of the same things,
Hmm.
but we have two different opinions. I'm more on the right, you're
Yeah.
more on the left. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of my a lot of my ideology, I guess you would say,
Hmm.
is my age and stage. Um,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure in politics, everybody likes to keep the status quo.
Hmm.
My status quo was good, you know, during the Bush years and during the Trump years. The first time, those were my good
Hmm.
years. Um, and w- as Americans, we tend to vote to keep status quo. I
Hmm.
voted against my own special self interests when I voted for Donald Trump because I feel like my self interests conflict with my children's interests when they're older.
Yeah.
So I think this would be a great place to like pause this conversation. And
Yeah.
I, man, I'd love to talk to you again. It's really refreshing to be
Hmm.
able to talk to a young person and somebody who has a different ideological view from mine without screaming at each other. The open dialogue, it's great.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of great ideas, and I think the more that we as people can have these type of conversations where you've changed my mind on a couple things today. You've changed my mind on the whole the immigration stuff.
Hmm.
My opinion, like I was a fence sitter, but now I'm like, well, maybe we don't go get them. I'm now, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if we could have open dialogue like this, an open, honest dialogue, it changes the world, man. We don't have to
Yeah.
scream at each other. If we disagree, man, that we could just talk it out sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's best for the country. And I think that's what the internet should be, is people just politely discussing differences, because you have differences with everybody in your life, right? Like you have differences with your wife, you have differences with your children, with your friends, and you talk them out. Like you talk them out. That's something we should do, I think, more in this country. But
Which, speaking of differences with my wife, this is a weird dichotomy. She's even more conservative than I am. So
yeah, it might be a unique family dynamic there
yeah,
then.
I actually I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm a
Yeah,
stay-at-home dad, and she works full time. So it's like we
yeah.
we do have We do have some flip floppy gender roles here, I guess you
Yeah.
would say. But at the same time, like I'm still king of the castle. This is Dad's
Yeah.
house, you know, and Dad rules the roost. And
Look at you being woke.
yeah, amen to that. Well, if you ask my wife, I run the roost. I rule the house, I guess you would say. But if you want to really know what it is, like it's her world, man. We're just living in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it is, how it should be. If you ask my girlfriend, probably too.
Amen. Hey, well, Pan Zeitgeist, where can people find you,
Yeah.
man?
Uh, you can find me as Pan Zeitgeist on Instagram, uh, TikTok, and YouTube. I'll be putting up more content soon. It's not the best right now, but get on early. You'll be able to say you're an early fan. So, you
Hell
know.
yeah. Hell yeah. Pan Zeitgeist, hang out with me for just a moment and we'll let the fans go. We'll see you guys later. Bye.